One Mediator Media cross-analysis. On today's show, we will talk about obeying authorities, conservatives moving on beyond Facebook and Twitter. Hang on, let's analyze.
We are often compared with countries that are not comparable to us. We are not a little island of 5 million people that we can shut off. We're not a country that would accept if a ruler tells us, you must do this. I was talking with our UK colleagues just today who were saying the UK is very similar to where we are now in our break because each of our countries have that independent spirit, but we don't want to be told what to do. Well, I understand that, but now is the time to do what you're told.
Do what you're told. Do what you're told.
Today I'm identifying houses of worship, churches, synagogue, and mosques as essential places that provide essential services. Some governors have deemed liquor stores and abortion clinics as essential, but have left out churches and other houses of worship. It's not right. So I'm correcting this injustice and calling houses of worship essential.
Okay, so a frequently asked question right now is, what do we do? Do we obey these requirements of the law as far as lockdowns, as far as closing churches, or do we gather together and do what we're supposed to? Well, there's many different responses to that. Biblically, we're supposed to follow the authorities, right, as they were placed there by God, so long as they don't cross the line of what's a God commandment versus what's a secular commandment, right? And so let's continue looking at this and see what other information we have out there and what's being suggested.
In a case that went through the Supreme Court this week, Judge Alito was part of the minority opinion on whether churches could meet like casinos could meet. And his statement I thought was interesting. He said, the problem is no longer one of exigency, but one of discriminatory treatment of places of worship. That from a member of the United States Supreme Court who sees it as nothing but discrimination.
John Stevens, if I may. John, from a biblical perspective, what right, if any, does the government have to tell us how we can or can't worship?
I think the key thing for us all here is to think through the biblical principles on that. And it seems to me we're trying to hold together two principles at the same time. One is that the Bible clearly teaches that we should respect and obey authorities that have been placed over us. The other side is that we should obey Christ rather than men if there's a clash between what the state requires and what God requires. I don't think it's the same as the command to the Hebrew midwives of kill the babies, nor is it quite the same as the command to the apostles never to preach in the name of Jesus. It seems to me what's crucial is that the Bible doesn't allow us to disobey simply because we dislike a law and find it inconvenient. The Bible doesn't allow us to disobey simply because we distrust the government. The circumstance in which we have the right to disobey and ought to disobey is when we believe we have a higher duty to obey Christ, and obeying Christ would be prevented by obedience to the legislation.
So Discern reports this week. So Fauci says that to Americans, now is the time to do what you're told. You guys saw that video. And so it says here, Dr. Fauci said now's the time for Americans to do what they're told. And on Thursday, while speaking with other health officials at Washington National Cathedral. So ultimately he's saying it's time for you to listen. Okay, what do we do about that? Well, Bible does tell us to respect our authorities, right? Do we consider Fauci one of our authorities? Well, he is considered an authority in the scientific world, right? That being said, the tricky part, and as you saw some of those videos, the tricky part is, are we being prevented from serving God? Are we being prevented from following what God intends and commands in his word? Is that what's happening? I don't know. At this point, it is a tough call, right? Everybody's getting tired of it. It's not just Christians getting tired of it. Everybody's getting tired of it. And so that being said, do we not gather at all? Do we gather? Do we gather as we normally would? I think it'd be a black eye to the Church of Christ if we did exactly what we normally did. You know, we'd say essentially, we're different than all of you, and we don't need to do what you do, and we're just going to do our own thing. I don't think that's what God intends. And we are to be a light to the world, right? Not fill it with darkness or be oppositional. So the question is, when do we do that? And so when we look at examples, right, and we look at the examples in the Bible in terms of when that happened, we look at the book of Daniel, right, where they were being told to worship this other god, to do things that were against the will of God, for example. The answer was no, absolutely not. If we're told you cannot gather, that's a problem, right? They don't right now. The current situation doesn't say you cannot gather, meaning you cannot pastor, you cannot give a word, you cannot meet with each other, you can't discuss God, right? Essentially, we're not being told that. We're not being told to worship a different entity or anything like that. So at this point, it is shaky ground. It is iffy in terms of what's happening. Some people say no, go this way. Some people say no, you can't do that. So yes, there are a lot of opinions, but we always have to go back to the word, right? And always have to look at what God intends. When Paul was being addressed several times and he was thrown before the courts, and he always responded with the word of God. That was always his response. His response was always, what God intended for everyone, and and a defense for what he believed in. And that's pretty much it. He didn't, oppose them. He didn't attack them. And although he was attacked himself. So we have a lot of good examples in the book for sure. And so one brief example here, we have in Acts 23, we have Paul, who was just captured and thrown in here. And so it says, Paul, in 23, it says, Paul looked at the members of the court and said, my brothers, I have done what I thought God wanted me to do right up to this day. And so emphasizing that the only thing he did was essentially what God wanted him to do. And as Christians, that's what we're called to do, what God commands us to do. And if anything gets in the way of that, intentionally, right? So in other words, saying you cannot do this, that's where there's a problem. And so in verse 11, it says, the next night the Lord stood beside Paul. He said, be glad, Paul, you have told the people about me in Jerusalem. That's the great call, right? And that's the great commission. We're supposed to go out and share the gospel. We're supposed to go out and do the Lord's work. If anything gets in the way of that, then God's word comes first. That's the difference, right? So coronavirus, these lockdowns, these restrictions, so long as we're at the meantime, right, they're not totally preventing that we can still share the word. We can still share the gospel. We can still somewhat congregate in small groups. We can still do some of this stuff. Not completely barred at this point. Of course, persecutions to come, right? And so there will come a day where that is the case. But for the meantime, we got to be watchful, be in prayer, and do the will of the Father, right? Let's move on. So our next story here, NPR is reporting conservatives flock to Mercer-funded Parler, claim censorship on Facebook and Twitter. We've all seen this, right? So we've all seen that on Facebook and Twitter. We're seeing that stories are being taken down, people are being censored, things are being flagged. I mean, people who the president of the United States is being flagged and taken down. You had New York Post taken down. A very long-standing newspaper taken down. You have well-known people being flagged, censored. But when you see things on the other side, the other end, the far end, whether it's left or far left, you don't see the same thing. You don't see the same response, right? Things are posted that are hateful, that are this or that. So yes, of course, I'm gonna be fair. Sometimes they do take them down, but for the most part, it's not at the same level. That being said, so it says conservatives flock to Mercer-funded Parler. So I checked this place out, right? I'm not too familiar with it. I'm still getting to know it, but apparently a lot of the conservatives are going over there. They're saying, forget Twitter, forget Facebook. And Parler seems to be much more open in terms of letting people speak their mind, their opinions, so long as it doesn't contain things that are, completely out of place, right? So child pornography, things like that, things that totally should not happen. Of course, they're going to ban that. But as far as you sharing your opinion, you can do it. Sounds great. I'm checking it out. And I've also heard some people are actually going to jump over there, and I knew this was going to happen. So some on the left are going to jump over there because they want to begin to sabotage this. I don't see that they can, right? Because if you can speak your mind, and we don't mind that. Somebody can speak their mind, go ahead. That's just how it works. If you're more on the conservative side, you tend to listen to both sides, right? Because we want truth. I look at, far left media, I look at far right media, I look at right media, I look at left media, I look at all the media. But the point is, we want to be heard and speak. So it says the company puts few restrictions on what users can post. That has made it attractive to high-profile conservatives who claim Facebook and Twitter are censoring them, even though there is no evidence of these allegations of system anti-conservative bias. Really? Let's check this out.
Just like in the case of Google, there have been whistleblowers from Facebook that not only have offered evidence indicating your testimony was not truthful, but there's even video that suggests that content moderators that you employ are out there disadvantaging conservative content. I'm wondering if you are familiar with the experiences of Zach McElroy and Ryan Hartwig, two people who participated in Facebook content review, and what is your response to the very damning video evidence and the testimony from them that the culture that you lead within Facebook is one that disadvantages conservatives and leads to content manipulation?
Numerous instances with Facebook. In May of 2016, Gizmodo reported that Facebook had purposely and routinely suppressed conservative stories from trending news, including stories about CPAC, including stories about Mitt Romney, including stories about the Lois Lerner IRS scandal, including stories about Glenn Beck. In addition to that, Facebook has initially shut down the Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day page, has blocked a post of a Fox News reporter, has blocked over 24 Catholic pages, and most recently blocked Trump supporters Diamond and Silk's page with 1.2 million Facebook followers after determining their content and brand were, quote, unsafe to the community. The New York Post has the 4th highest circulation of any newspaper in America. The New York Post is over 200 years old. The New York Post was founded by Alexander Hamilton, and your position is that you can sit in Silicon Valley and demand of the media that you can tell them what stories they can publish, and you can tell the American people what reporting they can hear. Is that right?
No, this was a, every person, every account, every organization that signs up to Twitter agrees to a terms of service. Terms of service is
so
published.
Media outlets must genuflect and obey your dictates if they wish to be able to communicate with readers. Is that right?
So there you go. So right now, a lot of people are moving over to Parler. And if you're not familiar with it, it's another social media outlet that is coming out. And hey, if you're not being represented on one side, then time to move on. I agree. So I'm going to check it out. I'm going to see what's on there. Feel free to check it out. I'm not supporting it, not promoting it. All I'm saying is there's a lot of information out there. Even the news, mainstream media is now reporting on it, so you know it's something big in terms of they're probably freaking out in terms of what's coming. A lot of people are going from this platform to this one. They're saying that a lot of people are still staying on there, like a lot of big media companies, and then they're still staying on these platforms because obviously there's people there. But overall, a lot of people are going to start moving over because we are tired of not being able to just say what we think. And it doesn't really matter whether it's being fact-checked or not. That's not the issue. The issue is just really anything you put out now is pretty much fact-checked. So check it out. I don't know. Just something that's out there. Anyway, let's move on.
The fourth industrial revolution is a combination of technological breakthroughs which will completely change business models, society, economies. Fourth industrial revolution is coming with enormous speed and will change not only what we are doing, but who we are. We will have not less, we will have more globalization. But the question is, how do we master and how do we construct this new type of globalization? We have to make everything to ensure social cohesion of a society.
So, Klaus Schwab. Okay, so we did a whole segment on him on One Mediator Media. Check it out. Hit this button up here. Check it out. Go check out our other channel where we introduce these stories and then, come in here and talk about them a little bit biblically. Didn't go into as much detail here, but wanted to just briefly touch on the beast that comes out of the sea in Revelation 13. So it says, the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast come out of the sea. So there's different ideas as to what the sea can be, right? But as far as one thing that's out there is it's essentially the population, right? The people. And so this beast comes out, and it says it had 10 horns and 7 heads, and with 10 crowns and horns, and each had a blasphemous name. We're headed in a direction where essentially we're already slowly becoming a one world government, right? It's been in the works for a long time. You've heard of the New World Order. You've heard of all these groups. You've heard of these different groups that are putting things together. For example, the World Economic Forum, the UN World Economic Forum, the IMF, all these different groups that have been tossed around, the Trilateral Commission, all these different groups that are out there. The issue is they've been working on this for a while. They've been waiting for the right conditions. And what's happening right now, and what the World Economic Forum, what Klaus Schwab is saying, is that we have the perfect time and we can't let this opportunity slip through our fingers. What opportunity and what are we trying to do? That's the question. And so what it looks like when you read between the lines, right? Essentially, they're trying to give you Marxism, right? If you go through and you look at all the different things that they've put out, and let's go look at one real quick, as he gives his description about what he wants for this program and what his intention is for this new form of government, right? Because essentially he's saying we need to scrap capitalism as we know it, and we need to give you a different system. So one thing he uses is social cohesion, and that's their goal. A lot of these terms are rebranded, right? The rebranding from Marxist ideologies. So if you go look at Marx and what he wrote about, there are things that he wrote about that have just been rebranded, and now we just have them in a different, it's in a different pill, right? So it tastes different, smells different, but essentially it's the same one. So for example, it says here, terms such as inclusive economic growth and social inclusion have in many countries reached the top of the political agenda. For example, in China, where Prime Minister Hu Jintao in 2004 launched the concept of a harmonious society. Well, harmonious society is very similar to social cohesion. And it's funny that they give us China as the example of what was put out there. So it continues saying these economic developments have pushed the issue of social integration or social cohesion up to the political agenda, but so has the general economic and cultural globalization, the flow of migrants across nation borders, and security concerns after 9/11. And so essentially, they've been working on these terms for a long time. I believe 1971 is when the World Economic Forum was put together by Klaus Schwab. And since then, they've been planning this plan of bringing in this different order, which essentially is a Marxist order. It's all about the environment, which is why they're pushing this environment concept very much. It's all about social equality, social integration, social cohesion. Sounds a lot like the communal societies, such as the communist societies, such as China. And this is what their goal is. Now, China's kind of they've changed a little bit, right? So the communism has become a little bit more capitalistic, not quite so. It's still very authoritarian, but that's kind of the concept. Okay, so where you get rid of ownership and all these other things, and you're given so much, right? Where equality, you take from this person and you give to these people, and essentially you all become the same, except for those that run the show. So it says social integration and social cohesion are difficult terms to define. I simply suggest that we define social integration as the process that led to social cohesion. Okay, two-step process here. Thereby, we are left with the job of defining social cohesion, which ordinary citizens, policymakers, and social scientists often just refer to as the glue or the bonds that keep societies integrated. However, for academic purposes, it is important to be more specific about what we actually meant by the terms that we use. Based on the review below, I suggest that we define social cohesion as the belief held by the citizens of a given nation state that they share a moral community which enables them to trust each other. Following these definitions, which are in line with academic origin of the concept, see below, social cohesion is a non-material phenomenon to be observed in the cognitions of citizens. And following this line of reasoning, phenomena such as equal objective chances of citizens, employment, the rule of law are indeed important. Maybe more important than social cohesion, but they are in themselves not indicators of social cohesion. So it continues, in a modern, globalized, and multicultural world, it is difficult and problematic to cultivate a similarity of mind. It might actually be in direct conflict with the idea to ensure non discrimination, tolerance, and respect for diversity. Durkheim also rejected the idea that modern societies could be kept together by shared moral standard. Essentially, you cannot, the goal is to have us become similar in mind in more ways than one, right? You can't have a difference in thought, which essentially is what's becoming of our society. We just saw a couple things on that in terms of, the censorship and all these things. If you think differently or if you have a different belief that's not in accordance with the expected societal view is, then essentially you are gotten rid of, you are canceled, you are gone. This is essentially cancel culture. It's really interesting. Pre-modern societies were, according to Durkheim, characterized by sizable and strong collective consciousness, which typically had a strong religious fundament. so that any deviation from the moral codex was typically interpreted as a religious violation. The strong norms of right and wrong and intense monitoring in small communities upheld non-material similarities. So ultimately, they want to kind of replicate what I guess used to be, right? So I guess that you can say the Catholic Church in some areas, or the majority of the world, or places where they had other like Islam and other things, where it was a religious structure, right, that held things together. Now they're looking to remove that with some new moral cohesion, where essentially it's more tolerance and different things like that, not necessarily right or wrong. It just has to do with, are we all harmonious? Interesting changes coming up. Just want to briefly touch on that. If you want to see a little more, check out our other channel. But that's pretty much it for today. We'll continue touching on this every now and then, because essentially, I mean, it's coming. It's coming. The Great Reset that they're talking about, Klaus Schwab's plan for the fourth industrial revolution, and all these different things that are coming our way. They were waiting for the right moment, and they're saying, literally saying, we cannot let this go by. We have to take advantage of the COVID-19 situation and begin to build up from there. They were waiting for something like this to happen in order to bring in this new system. And they're saying it's worldwide. The entire world has to take part. They say from China to the United States. This goes in line with what we're seeing that's coming in terms of revelation. Keep an eye out. Let's keep an eye out for this. Stay in prayer for sure. And be watchful. Like Jesus said, stay in watch, right? We have to watch and pray. And that's our show for today. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to check out One Mediator Media on our other channel. And always don't forget, like, subscribe. Again, like, subscribe, hit the buttons, hit the bell. Come back and we'll have more stuff for you. So thanks again. See you guys later. Bye.